The past that won't stay buried. The sun was bright that afternoon in the small village of Umus. Birds sang gently in the trees, and children's laughter floated through the air like music. Awele balanced a wide tray of oranges on her head, walking from house to house. Her smile was soft, her eyes kind, and even though life had never been easy, she carried herself with the quiet strength of a lioness. She was only 16 but already full of dreams. She wanted to be a nurse someday, to heal people and help her widowed mother, Mama Getchi. Together, they lived in a small mud house at the edge of the village, their love the only wealth they truly had. Awele called an old woman from her compound. "Bring me 2 oranges, my child." Awele ran over, picked 2 of the ripest fruits, and handed them over with a grin. "Thank you, Mama Oluchi," she said, collecting her coins. The people loved her. She was hardworking, respectful, and cheerful. But fate, cruel and cunning, was hiding just around the corner. The stranger with the sweet smile. That day, as she neared the village square, a tall man in neat clothes waved at her. He was not from the village. His shirt was ironed, his wristwatch shiny, and his voice smooth like melted honey. "Hello, beautiful," he said, smiling warmly. "Can I buy some oranges?" Awele stepped forward shyly. "Yes, sir." "How many?" "3. "But, may I also know your name?" She hesitated. No one ever asked her that in such a way. "Awele." "Awele," he repeated slowly, as if tasting it. "That's a beautiful name for a beautiful girl." "I'm Obina." He paid her and took the oranges, but he didn't leave. Instead, he sat on a bench and kept talking. He said he was from the city, visiting an uncle nearby. He asked her about her life, her school, her mother. He praised her courage, her beauty, her ambition. She listened, smiling shyly, her heart racing. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. Not like she mattered. He told her she was special. He told her she deserved better. He told her he could help her chase her dreams. Then, he asked her to walk with him, to a house nearby where he had forgotten something. Just a quick stop, he promised. At first, she hesitated. But he was gentle, polite, and charming. Her guard lowered. She followed. The empty house. The building stood alone at the edge of the village, half completed, silent, and cold. Its windows were just open holes, the floor dusty and rough. "Just wait here," Obina said, pushing the door open. Awele stepped in after him, cautious. That was when it happened. Without warning, his hand grabbed her wrist. His sweet voice changed. His eyes turned sharp. "No," she screamed. "What are you doing?" But no one heard. The building was too far. Her voice echoed in the cement walls, useless. He overpowered her. Her pleas, her screams, her tears, they meant nothing to him. When it was over, she lay on the cold floor, shaking. Her wrapper torn, her heart shattered. Obina stood, adjusted his clothes, and without looking back, walked out. She never saw him again. Broken. When she stumbled home that night, Mama Nkechi was outside, calling her name in fear. Awele's face was swollen with tears, her body weak, her soul crushed. She collapsed into her mother's arms, crying wordlessly. "What happened, my child?" Mama Nkechi whispered, holding her tight. For hours, Awele couldn't speak. When she finally did, her mother screamed, a cry that ripped through the night like lightning. The news spreads. In villages like Umus, nothing stays hidden for long. First, it was whispers. Then pointing fingers. Then silence. When Awele's belly began to swell, the whispers turned to scorn. "She's too young. Where's the father? She must have seduced someone." She's a disgrace. No one asked her what happened. No one cared that she had been forced. She was now that girl, the spoiled one, the shameful one. Even her old customers stopped buying oranges. The same people who had called her my child now crossed the street when she passed. Mama Nkechi stood by her daughter, but the pain was too heavy for her aging heart. She worked hard to feed them, but the shame consumed her. One morning, as she bent to sweep their compound, she clutched her chest and fell. They rushed her to the village clinic. But by nightfall, she was gone. Dead from a heart that could no longer carry the weight of sorrow. Alone with a child. Awele buried her mother under the big mango tree behind their house. Only Mama Ajok, a soft-spoken woman from a nearby village, came for the burial. After the mourners left and the food pots were empty, Awele sat by the grave and cried like a child. "I'm sorry, Mama," she wept. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for any of this." Weeks passed. Then months. She gave birth to a baby boy alone, in the same mud house, with no midwife, only pain and fear by her side. She named him Somtechuku, "Join me to praise God." He had a tiny round birthmark near his shoulder. His fingers were long. His eyes, sharp, curious, just like his father's. But Awele never spoke that name again. She didn't have money for baby clothes. She used old wrappers. She fed him with pap and rainwater. She sang to him when he cried and told him stories when he smiled. When he laughed, she forgot her pain for a moment. She learned to walk again, with him tied to her back. People stared, judged, whispered. But she kept walking. Step by step. Day by day. Somto was her strength now. Her reason to keep going. A glimmer of kindness. One day, as she sat near a roadside shed, feeding Somto, a woman approached her. "You are Awele, right?" the woman asked. She looked up, nervous. "Yes. I'm Mama Ajok. I came to your mother's burial. I used to know her from the women's fellowship." Awele nodded slowly. "Come with me," the woman said. "You shouldn't be living like this with a child." At first, Awele refused. She was ashamed, afraid, and tired. But that night, it rained hard. Her roof leaked. Somto caught a cold. She had no medicine. The next morning, she took her son and followed Mama Ajok. A new shelter. Mama Ajok's home was small but neat. Her heart was wide and warm. She gave Awele a mat, a plate, a wrapper, and love. She helped her find work as a cleaner in a company called Divine Trust Holdings in the nearby town of Ojidai. "They don't care about your past there," Mama Ajok said. "Just work hard and smile." And she did. Every morning, Awele cleaned floors, washed windows, arranged files. Every evening, she came home to Somto, his face lighting up when he saw her. He was for now. And she swore nothing would ever take him from her daughter-mother's fight. The town of Ojidai was louder, faster, and busier than Umu's, but it welcomed Awele with open arms. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a cursed shadow wandering the earth. Mama Ajok, her mother's old friend, became more than just a helper. She became a mother again to Awele and a grandmother to little Somto. "A child is a blessing, no matter how he came," Mama Ajok would say, her voice soft but firm as she stirred ogbono soup over a fire. Awele didn't know how to thank her. She scrubbed, cleaned, and helped with everything in the house, even when she was exhausted from her new job. Divine Trust Holdings. The company stood tall in the center of the town, glass doors, polished tiles, golden logos on the walls. Divine Trust Holdings. It sounded like something from a dream, but Awele knew that dreams didn't come true for girls like her. Still, she gave her best every day. She wore a plain grey uniform and carried a bucket with soap, rags, and polish. She cleaned quietly, mostly before the staff arrived. She was never late. Never rude. Never tired. The first few weeks were hard. She worried someone would ask about her past. But nobody did. The staff came and went. Some smiled. Others ignored her. But she didn't mind. She wasn't there to make friends. She was there to fight for her future. For Somto. A curious child with sharp eyes. Somto was now 5 years old. He spoke clearly, asked many questions, and ran faster than his small legs should allow. "Why don't I have a daddy?" he asked one evening as Awele was removing her shoes. She froze. He had never asked that before. She sat beside him, her heart thudding. "Some children don't have daddies around," she said gently. "But you have me, and Mama a joke. That's all that matters, my love." Somto didn't argue. He just nodded slowly and hugged her. "Okay, Mommy." She smiled, but deep inside, the question haunted her. The owner in the shadows. Few people saw him. Mr. Obinna Nwachukwu, the owner of Divine Trust Holdings, was a name spoken with respect, fear, and awe. They said he built the company from scratch. They said he had power in places even politicians dared not enter. But no one really knew him. He rarely visited the office. And when he did, he moved like a whisper. His bodyguards always stayed back, and he never spoke more than needed. When he walked past, staff bowed. Cleaners stood still. Managers straightened their backs. And Awele. She kept her eyes on her mop. But one morning, everything changed. Awele catches his eye. It was raining heavily. The office was quiet except for the sound of her rag swiping over a conference table. That's when he walked in. Obinna. Clean-shaven, tall, in a dark suit. His steps were silent, but his presence loud. Awele didn't notice him at first. She was wiping a glass window with deep focus. Then she turned. Their eyes met. Obinna blinked. He tilted his head slightly. She bowed quickly. "Good morning, sir." Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled slightly. Something about him made the air feel thick. "Morning," he said simply, then walked past her. But as he left, he glanced over his shoulder again. There was something familiar about her face. He couldn't explain it. The little boy in the waiting room. It became a routine. On Fridays, Mama Ajok brought Somto to the office compound to wait for Awele. Somto would sit on a bench in the reception area, holding a small juice box, swinging his legs happily. The staff adored him. He was polite, funny, and full of questions. Why are the chairs spinning? What does a company do? Why do people wear suits when they are hot? Everyone laughed. Even the stern-faced receptionist gave him sweets. Then one Friday, Obinna arrived unexpectedly. He walked past the waiting area and paused. A small boy was sitting alone. Laughing. Talking to a security guard. Something pulled at Obinna's heart. He walked over slowly, crouched beside the boy. "What's your name?" The boy looked up, his eyes shining. "Somto." "Nice name," Obinna said. "How old are you?" 5. Then he stretched his arm and pointed proudly at a small birthmark on his shoulder. "See. My mommy says I was born with this. It's my special mark." Obinna froze. His breath caught. That mark. That same round, dark patch. He had it too. Exactly in the same place. The memory returns. Obinna stood slowly, his mind spinning. Her name was Awele. The memory hit him like lightning. The unfinished building. Her screams. Her tears. The blood on the floor. He had buried it for years. Told himself it was a mistake. Just one bad night. Something to forget. But now, here stood a child. His child. And the cleaner, that woman. She was the girl. He nearly staggered. His heart pounded in shame. Suddenly, the world didn't feel so big anymore. Guilt wakes up. That night, Obinna sat in his mansion, staring at the ceiling. He didn't eat. He didn't speak to anyone. His thoughts were loud and cruel. I'm a father. I'm a monster. She works for me now. She doesn't know. He walked to the mirror and stared at his reflection. Who am I? He had money. Power. A good name. But none of that could wash away what he had done. Questions without answers. The next week, he watched her more closely. Awele walked with her head down, her back straight. She worked hard. Never complained. And Somto, so full of life. His son. The boy looked like him. Laughed like him. Even had his stubborn frown. But she didn't seem to know. She didn't recognize him. And even if she did, would she ever forgive? He couldn't speak. Not yet. He needed time. But time was a luxury guilt didn't respect. Awele feels a change. She noticed it too. Her boss passed her twice and greeted her softly. Not with a nod, but with full words. Good morning, Awele. The sound of her name on his lips made her heart skip, not out of affection, but confusion. Why was he suddenly noticing her? Why was he kind? Why did he ask about Somto? One day, he handed her a white envelope. Buy something nice for your boy. She refused at first, but he insisted. She took it, muttered thanks, and walked away quickly. Her heart was racing. She didn't trust this. But part of her, deep inside, felt something strange. Like a storm was coming. And somehow, the wind was blowing straight toward her, the revelation. Obinna Nwachukwu sat alone in his dimly lit study, the curtains drawn tightly against the evening sun. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock and the quiet storm raging in his heart. He hadn't been able to sleep since the day he saw the birthmark. That mark had haunted his mind, clawing at the door he had locked for years. Now the truth stared at him with wide, innocent eyes, his son, Somto. Awele, the cleaner with the tired smile and quiet strength, was that girl. The one he had left broken on the floor of that unfinished building. And the boy? He was the price of a sin Obinna could no longer bury. Digging into the past. He called a private investigator, not to dig dirt on Awele, but to understand what she had gone through. A piece of him hoped it wasn't true. But the report came in cold, complete, and clear. Name, Awele Nwankwo. Age at incident, 16. Village, Umuse. Mother, deceased. Pregnancy recorded, confirmed, abandoned by community. Son, Somto Nwankwo, age 5. Guardian, currently living with Mama Ajok in Ojidai. Obinna's hands trembled as he read every word. She was just a child. And I ruined her. The shame wrapped around him like chains. The weight of confession. He sat on the edge of his bed, the file in his hands, staring at the name he had once forgotten. He couldn't carry this weight alone anymore. So he picked up the phone and called the one person he trusted more than anyone, his mother, Mama Nena. Mama Nena's house. Mama Nena was a graceful woman in her late 60s. Her hair was now silver, but her voice still carried strength. She lived in a quiet compound surrounded by flowering trees and warm silence. When Obinna arrived unannounced, she sensed something was wrong. My son, you didn't call before coming. Are you alright? Obinna couldn't answer. He fell to his knees before her, tears already forming. Mama. I did something, years ago. I never told you. She sat down slowly, her eyes narrowing with concern. Talk to me, my son. Obinna took a shaky breath. And then, piece by piece, he told her everything, the village trip, the orange cellar, the unfinished building, the way he had lied to himself for years. By the time he finished, his mother's hands were trembling. You mean, you forced yourself on a girl? Her voice cracked. He nodded. And now, she works for you. With your son by her side, and she doesn't know. Obinna covered his face in shame. I didn't know until recently. But now I do. And Mama. I can't live with this. I want to make it right. Mama Nena stood up, pacing. Her heart beat fast with shock, shame, and sorrow. I raised you better than this, Obinna, she whispered. You have brought disgrace not just to yourself, but to my soul. The visit to Mama Ajok. The next morning, Mama Nena traveled to Ojidai. She didn't call ahead. She needed to face the truth, face the woman who had helped raise her unknown grandchild. She arrived at a small bungalow surrounded by potted plants and the smell of fried beans. Awele wasn't home. She was at work. But Mama Ajok answered the door. She recognized Mama Nena from pictures, Obinna's mother, the woman with elegance and power. She was surprised, but invited her in respectfully. After pleasantries and a shared cup of zobo, Mama Nena spoke. I've come, not as a guest, but as a mother with a heavy heart. Mama Ajok nodded slowly. I believe, the child you care for, Somto, is my grandson. The glass cup in Mama Ajok's hand slipped and shattered on the floor. What did you say? My son. Obinna, he is Somto's father. A cold silence settled between them. Mama Ajok's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Then finally, your son, he was the one. The one who did that to Awele. Tears welled in Mama Nena's eyes. Yes. And I am ashamed. But I want to make it right. Please. Help me tell her. Gently. She deserves the truth. The secret meeting. That evening, a plan was set. Awele returned from work, exhausted but peaceful. Somto was already asleep in the next room. Mama Ajok asked her to sit. We have a guest, she said softly. Awele looked up and saw the elderly woman from her office once, Mr. Obinna's mother. She froze. What is she doing here? Awele asked cautiously. Mama Ajok sat beside her and took her hand. My daughter, what you are about to hear will hurt you, more than anything you have felt before. But you must know the truth. Awele blinked, her heart racing. Mr. Obinna, he's your son's father, Mama Ajok whispered. Silence. Then Awele laughed, a dry, bitter laugh. That's not possible. He is, Mama Nene confirmed, her eyes wet. He remembers. He knows. He saw the birthmark. He investigated. And he confessed. Awele stood up slowly, her legs shaking. No. 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 This is not real. Her voice cracked as she backed away from them. That man is the one who destroyed me. She clutched her chest like her heart was physically tearing. Tears rolled down her face. Her knees gave way, and she sank to the floor. The shattered spirit. Her cries shook the house. Loud, deep, raw. I served him tea. I smiled at him. I cleaned for him, she wailed. And all this time, it was him. She pulled her scarf from her head and flung it across the room. I have been greeting the man who left me to rot. I carried his child while the world laughed at me. I buried my mother because of him. Mama Nene tried to step forward, but Awele pointed at her with fury in her eyes. Don't come near me. My daughter, I know you hate him. You have every right to hate, Awele whispered. You think this is about hate? This is about pain. I survived the worst storm of my life, and now I find out I was walking in the rain with the man who sent it. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I want him gone. I want nothing from him. I want him to stay far away from my child. Mama Ajok stood in silence, tears pouring. She had seen Awele in many states, fearful, hungry, hopeless. But never like this. Never so broken. The son wakes. From the next room, a small voice called, Mommy. Awele wiped her face quickly and ran to him. Somto sat on the edge of the mattress, rubbing his eyes. Why are you crying? She pulled him into her arms, holding him close. Nothing, my love. Just something in my eye. He wrapped his arms around her neck. I love you, Mommy. She clutched him tighter, the words hitting her heart like a drum. I love you more. A promise to herself. That night, Awele didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, her arms around Somto's small body. She remembered every moment, the shame, the hunger, the hospital with no medicine, the nights she cried into her pillow. He did this. And now he wants to walk into their lives as if time had no memory. She made a promise to herself. She would protect Somto. She would raise him with love, but never with lies. And if Obinna ever tried to come close again, he would feel the fire of a mother who had walked through hell and come out still standing. The storm within. The sun rose with no joy in its light the next morning. The streets of Ojidai bustled like usual, traders shouted, taxis honked, and school children skipped down dusty roads. But for Awele, the world had stopped spinning. She stood in front of the mirror, her uniform folded neatly on the bed. Her face was tired, her eyes swollen. Inside, she was numb. She had barely slept. How could she, after discovering the man who shattered her world was the one signing her paycheck? Her heart beat loudly in her chest as she picked up the envelope she had written the night before, her resignation letter. She was done. One last step inside. As she entered Divine Trust Holdings, the building felt different. What once felt like just another workplace now felt like a trap. Every corridor, every corner whispered betrayal. She kept her eyes low as she walked past familiar faces. She didn't want their greetings. She didn't want their concern. She went straight to her supervisor, Madam Risi, and handed over the envelope. What's this? Risi asked, eyebrows raised. My resignation. Risi looked shocked. What happened? Are you in trouble? Did someone offend you? Awele shook her head, her voice calm but hollow. It's personal. Please accept it. Madam Risi sighed. You've been one of our best staff. Even the MD himself. Awele's shoulders stiffened at the mention of Obinna. Please don't mention him. Madam Risi blinked in confusion. All right, if you insist. She nodded and turned to leave. But fate wasn't done with her yet. A voice at the gate. She was almost out of the building when she heard it. Awele. She froze. The voice was familiar. Deep. Soft. Full of pain. She turned slowly. Obinna stood by the security gate, his eyes pleading, his suit forgotten, his tie loose. He looked like a man unraveling. I heard, you resigned, he said carefully. She didn't respond. I just wanted to. Stop. Her voice was sharp. Don't say another word. He stepped forward. I didn't know it was you, Awele. If I had known. You would have done what? She snapped. You would have still walked past me. Greeted me like I was your staff while you lived in comfort. Obinna swallowed. I was young, foolish. I never meant. Never meant, she barked. You never meant to destroy my life. You never meant to take everything from me and vanish. Tears were already gathering in her eyes. You left me bleeding in that building. You left me to bury my mother alone. You left me to raise a child with nothing but shame in my hands. Obinna's eyes filled with tears. Awele, please. I'm not here to defend myself. I want to be in Somto's life. I want to do right by both of you. She raised her hand, silencing him. If you or your family ever come near my son, I will fight you with everything I have. Then she turned, her steps heavy, her back straight. She did not look back. A river of tears. That night, the storm that had been building inside her finally broke. She sat on the floor of her room, her head in her hands, her sobs silent but powerful. Somto was asleep in the next room, breathing softly, unaware of the war that raged in his mother's chest. Mama Ajok stood by the doorway, watching her. She had given Awele space all day, waiting for the right time. Now, she stepped forward and sat beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. My daughter, she whispered, let it out. And Awele did. She wept like the sky during a rainy season. Tears of pain. Tears of anger. Tears of shame. I hate him, she whispered. I want to hate him forever. Mama Ajok's story. Mama Ajok looked into the distance, her voice calm. You know, my dear. I once said those same words. Awele looked up slowly. I was in my 20s when I met Chuka. He was my everything. Kind. Gentle. He told me I was the moon in his night. A small sad smile formed on her lips. But Chuka had secrets. And one day, I found out he had another family, a wife and 2 children in another town. Awele gasped softly. I was broken. I cursed him. I swore I'd never forgive. I left everything and ran. Years passed, and I carried that hatred like a crown. It made me feel strong. She paused. But it also made me bitter. What happened to him? Awele asked. One day, I heard he died of a sickness. He was gone, and I still had all that anger inside me. No closure. No peace. Just regret. She turned to Awele, her eyes full of love. You think anger makes you strong. But sometimes, it just keeps you chained. Awele's inner war. That night, Awele lay beside Somto. His little hand rested on her chest. He stirred in his sleep, whispering, I love you, mommy. She kissed his forehead. I love you more. But her mind was in chaos. How could she forgive? How could she even begin to let go of what Obinna had taken from her? But Mama Ajok's words echoed. Anger can be a prison. She stared at the ceiling, heart aching. She wanted to move on. She wanted peace. But she didn't want to forget. A morning of reflection. The next morning, she stood outside under the orange tree behind Mama Ajok's house. She closed her eyes, breathing in the morning air. She thought of her mother, how strong she had been. She thought of little Somto, how innocent he was. And she thought of herself. The girl who had been broken. The girl who had survived. The girl who now stood, tall and unyielding. She was no longer just a victim. She was a mother. A warrior. But even warriors needed healing. Forgiveness is not forgetting. The wind was quiet that morning. Birds chirped faintly outside as Mama Ajok sat on the wooden bench beneath the mango tree in her compound. Her eyes were fixed on the sky, but her heart was busy elsewhere, busy carrying the weight of the young woman under her roof, and the young man who had finally confessed his shame. She had watched Awele drift like a silent storm the past few days, angry, then quiet, then angry again. Each emotion pulling her in different directions. But Mama Ajok knew one truth: silence could not heal what needed to be faced. And so, she picked up her old Nokia phone and dialed a number she had saved, but never thought she would use. Mama Nena, it's time. The gathering. It was a Sunday afternoon. The house was still, the air tense. Inside, Awele sat on one end of the room, arms folded tightly. Her eyes were cold, her jaw set. On the opposite side sat Mama Nena, her head bowed respectfully, hands on her knees. And between them, standing nervously by the door, was Obinna. He looked nothing like the powerful company owner he was known to be. He wore a simple native shirt, no wristwatch, no bodyguards. Just sorrow in his eyes and weight on his shoulders. Awele didn't look at him. She couldn't. Mama Ajok entered last, slowly closing the door behind her. "You are all here," she said softly. "Let us begin." A man on his knees. Obinna walked forward. Then, to everyone's shock, he dropped to his knees before Awele. He did not speak immediately. He bowed his head and let the silence speak first. When he finally lifted his eyes, they were red and wet. "Awele," he said in a shaky voice. "There is no word, no language that can carry the weight of what I've done to you. I was young, selfish, and heartless. And I destroyed you." Awele clenched her fist. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't even deserve to be here. But I came not to claim anything, not love, not redemption. Only one thing." He swallowed hard. "I want to be a father to Somto." Tears streamed freely now. "I missed his birth. His first steps. His first words. I missed 5 years of his life, because of my sin. But if there's any chance, that I can be part of his tomorrow, I will take it. Even if it means starting as a stranger and waiting as long as it takes." The fire returns. Awele stood up abruptly, her chest rising and falling. "You want to be a father?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Now." Obinna remained on his knees. She stepped closer, pointing a trembling finger at him. "Where were you when I bled in that abandoned building? Where were you when I walked through markets hiding my face from whispers? Where were you when I watched my mother die of shame?" Obinna sobbed silently. Awele's voice cracked. "Do you know how many nights I held Somto close and cried silently so he wouldn't see my pain? Do you know how many times I was mocked, judged, blamed, for what you did to me?" She shook her head, tears falling. "I want to hate you." Obinna lowered his head further, unable to meet her gaze. "But..." Her voice dropped suddenly. "I also know that one day, Somto will ask about his father. One day, he will look into a mirror and ask why he has your eyes. One day, he will want answers." Silence filled the room. Awele sat back down, her body tired from the weight she had carried for too long. "I can't erase you from his blood," she whispered. "But I can choose how much power you have over his life. The choice." She looked up, finally meeting his gaze. "I forgive you," she said quietly. Obinna gasped softly, his eyes widening. "But not for you. For me. For my peace. For my son." She continued, her tone strong. "But forgiveness is not forgetting. It is not a clean slate. It is not pretending the past never happened." Obinna nodded slowly. "You will not force yourself into our lives. You will not buy your way in. You will show up with humility and patience. You will earn every moment." "I understand," he replied hoarsely. "And if you ever try to hurt him or me again, even with a careless word, I will close the door forever." "I swear," he said, pressing his forehead to the floor. "I swear on everything I have left." A thank you to the silent hero. He stood up shakily and turned to Mama Ajok. I didn't know what kind of person raised my son in my absence, but now I know. He bowed low before her. Thank you for saving what I destroyed. Thank you for loving them when I was nowhere to be found. Mama Ajok smiled, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. You still have much to prove, Obinna. But if your heart remains honest, the path will open. Mama Nena's words. Mama Nena rose to her feet. I failed as a mother, she said. I raised a son with good clothes and soft hands, but I forgot to teach him the weight of his actions. She turned to Awele, eyes full of tears. I am sorry, my daughter. For what he did. For what I didn't know. If you ever allow it. I would love to be part of Somto's life too. Not as a grandmother to spoil, but as a woman to protect. Awele didn't speak. But she nodded once. It was enough. A new beginning, not a new story. That evening, the meeting ended. There were no hugs. No sudden smiles. No promises of family dinners. But there was a shift. A new chapter. Not one of forgetfulness, but of careful healing. As Awele tucked Somto into bed that night, he looked up at her sleepily. Mommy. Yes, my love. Who was the man who cried today? She paused. Then slowly sat beside him. That was your father. He blinked. Will he come again? Yes. Maybe. Do you like him? Awele took a deep breath. I don't know. But I will try to let go, so I can breathe again. Somto smiled and hugged her tightly. I love you, Mommy. She kissed his forehead. I love you more. New beginnings. Time, they say, does not erase pain, but it teaches you how to live with the scar. Weeks turned to months, and the heavy clouds hanging over Awele's life began to shift, one ray of light at a time. She hadn't forgotten the past. But for the first time in years, it stopped controlling her. She was no longer a victim of her history. She was writing her future. Promises, not just words. Obinna stayed true to his word. There were no grand gestures. No surprise visits. No money thrown in her face. Just quiet, patient effort. He approached Mama Ajok first with a plan. He wanted to build Awele and Somto a proper home, not to claim ownership, but to provide stability. With her blessing, the project began. A modest 3-bedroom bungalow was erected just outside Ojidai town, a white-painted house with a little garden, a fenced yard, and a sign above the gate that read Peace Villa. Awele cried the first time she stepped inside. It's not about the walls, she whispered. It's the dignity. A business and a fresh start. Next came the business. Obinna registered a small cleaning agency in Awele's name, Shining Hands Cleaning Services, and helped her hire and train a few young women who needed work, just like she once did. I don't want charity, she said at first. This is not charity, Obinna replied gently. It's restoration. With Mama Ajok guiding her and Mama Nena occasionally visiting with supplies and encouragement, Awele began to flourish. The woman who once wiped office windows now ran a team of cleaners serving companies across Ojidai. And her smile, real, radiant, began to return. Becoming a father slowly. Obinna didn't rush into Somto's life. He started by visiting once a week. He brought books, not toys. Conversations, not bribes. He taught Somto to ride a bicycle, helped him with homework, and told him stories about trees that talked and kings who listened to their people. Somto, curious as always, asked many questions. Why did you and Mommy not live together before? Obinna looked at Awele for permission, then answered softly, because I made a mistake. A big one. And I'm trying to be better now. Somto stared at him for a while. Okay, he said. But you mustn't hurt my mommy again. Obinna smiled through tears. Never again, my son. The unexpected bloom. Life is full of surprises. Sometimes, healing makes space for joy you didn't see coming. One Sunday, Mama Ajok invited a guest for lunch, Dr. Ebuka, a quiet, warm-hearted man who had treated her arthritis at the community clinic. He was soft-spoken, tall, with kind eyes and a calming presence. He and Awele talked gently at first, about books, about work, about raising children. Then they talked more often. Then longer. And one day, Samto ran to Mama Ajok and shouted, "Mommy's friend brought ice cream. And he knows how to whistle with 2 fingers." They laughed. But it was no longer just laughter. Something was blooming. Something gentle. Love, the second time around. Dr. Ebuka never asked about Awele's past. He listened when she chose to share it. And when she told him about Obinna, about Samto's birth, about everything that had happened, he held her hand and said softly, "I don't see a broken woman. I see a warrior." They courted for over a year. He never rushed her. He always made Samto laugh. And one sunny afternoon, under the mango tree at Mama Ajok's compound, he got down on one knee. "I don't just want to marry you, Awele. I want to walk with you. As a friend, as a partner, and as a father to your son." Awele said yes, with tears in her eyes and a heart finally ready for joy. A family rewritten. Their wedding was simple, white lace, village drums, children dancing barefoot. Obinna attended. He stood quietly at the back, watching his son toss petals along the aisle, smiling proudly. After the ceremony, he shook Dr. Ebuka's hand and said, "Thank you for loving them." Dr. Ebuka smiled. "We love him, both of us. That's what matters." And that's how Samto grew up, surrounded by strength, love, and truth. He had 3 people guiding him, a mother who fought for his future, a father who admitted his past, and a stepfather who embraced him fully. Mama Nena's redemption. Mama Nena, too, found her healing. She visited often, bringing chin-chin and mangoes, telling Samto folktales about talking drums and flying tortoises. One day, she took Obinna's hand and said, "You did wrong. But you did not stay wrong. And that is how men become better." She called Awele her daughter. And meant it. Awele's voice. One day, Awele stood before a group of young women at a community gathering. They had asked her to speak, to share her journey. She took a deep breath, looked at the eager faces, and began. "I was 16 when my life changed forever. I was silenced, shamed, and left with nothing but a child and a broken heart." She paused, voice steady. "But I am here today, not as a victim, but as a voice. Because I chose not to carry hate. I chose to heal." She looked out over the crowd. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is not forgetting. It is strength. It is deciding that the pain will not define your future. That you will no longer bleed from wounds someone else gave you. The crowd clapped. But more importantly, they listened. Final reflections. As the sun set that evening, Awele sat with Samto on the porch of their home. He was taller now, smarter, full of laughter. "Mommy," he said, looking up, "do you think people can really change?" She looked at him, then into the horizon. "I believe people can grow," she replied. "They may not change the past, but they can choose a better future." He nodded. And she smiled. Because she had chosen peace. Not for the man who hurt her, but for the woman she was becoming. And for the child she was raising. Closing words, narration style. Forgiveness is not about pretending the past never happened. It is not a free pass for those who cause pain. It is about choosing peace over bitterness. It is about saying, I refuse to let this break me any longer. You forgive not because they deserve it, but because you do. Because peace is a gift you give to your heart. And when you heal, truly heal, you don't just change your story. You rewrite it. The end.